Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Glass in the Class. Today's episode, the importance of verbal communication in a computer-mediated world, with our guest, Ronnie Bincer. Your host today is Alex Ricky Gonzalez. She is the teacher at Kent State University today. She is also the voice of SEO Wise. I'm going to turn it over to Alex and Ronnie, and we're going to learn a little bit about communication today. How you doing, Alex?
I'm doing good. I'm really proud of the students that made it to class today. As most Americans know, July 4th was on Friday, and that becomes a July 4th weekend rather than a day. So I'm happy that they made it to class today to meet Ronnie Bincer. Ronnie, would you mind introducing yourself to my students? Do note that they aren't that familiar with what Hangouts are, so I'm throwing you in.
Okay, I will start. Hello, guys, and all of you out there watching live. My name's Ronnie Bincer. I have taken on the name as the Hangout Helper, as you can see right down there. And what I do is I help people learn to use this magical communication tool called Hangouts. And what it allows us to do is it allows us to get in front of a camera on a computer or on a cell phone or on a tablet and broadcast a message live to the world. So in other words, we have our own TV network. Or it allows us to meet with people literally anywhere in the world and have visual meetings where we can communicate and plan and do things together. And part of our focus today is going to be about non-verbal communication, so that if I make a face or I put a hand up or something like that without saying something, that can have an impact. So before we get too far into that, though, I think I'm supposed to say a little about where I came from. Is that right, Alex?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of my students, they're students, so eventually they're going to move on, whether it's in 4 years or 5 or 1. They're going to go out and they're going to find a job. So I do like to have my guests explain how they got to where they are today.
You bet. It's a serendipitous path. I did not come here directly, and I think more and more people are probably that way. So I started out in school as a musician, and we were talking about this in what we call the green room before we went live. I was a trumpet player. I have 2 degrees in music, and eventually got a job selling computers. That's how I got started sort of into this realm. And once I got that job selling computers, I realized I preferred training people how to use them rather than just selling them. And so I eventually shifted over into the realm of where I would be training people. And I did that for about 12 years. And this is where I got involved with what I call public speaking. Because I literally would travel from the company I did the training with would fly me around the country, or literally the world, but most in the United States. And I would stand up in front of a crowd of anywhere between 50 to 400 people in a room and stand there and A, entertain them, and B, teach them how to use the computer software that I was training. And I say entertain because that's part of it. If you don't, then it's not going to work very well. And I was one of the highest rated speakers amongst the group because I did a good job of mixing the entertainment along with the education. So that was part of the process of growing in how I learned how to be a trainer. So put that away for just a second. I moved on to the realm of SEO. I'm taking out little pieces just so we can get closer to where we want to go eventually. SEO standing for search engine optimization. I got involved with the computer nerd world doing marketing. And actually, let me back up. What I was training people to do was desktop publishing, which is when you are using software to create something that's printed. And now think of it the same idea. You're using software to create stuff online usually. But a lot of times many times in the past, printing was a big deal. So I got involved with that, and I focused and specialized on a program that some of you have heard of called Photoshop, which is a graphics program for almost creating anything artistically that has to do with pixels instead of lines per se. So I got involved with Photoshop. I eventually started training people outside of the world where I traveled training, and I had clients where I did desktop publishing for. Some of them are big, some of them are small. The biggest one I ever had was 3M. You've probably heard of 3M. I designed a lot of the, not really glamorous, but the little packaging that goes around electrical tape or other things like that. So
Really
that's involved with desktop publishing, yeah.
interesting.
Yeah. So with that said, I was involved with desktop publishing. Then I eventually got involved with search engine optimization. From the SEO world, I focused on a thing called video search engine optimization, where we're trying to get videos to show up higher in search engine results when people search for certain topics. And then Google Plus came around, and because Google is pretty much the big daddy when it comes to search, anything Google does, anyone that's involved with SEO would sort of pay attention to that. So once they come out with Google Plus, I decided, okay, I'm going to give this a shot, see what it does. And the short version of what happened is when I got onto Google Plus, I did what I call posting on purpose. I had a specific goal in mind to influence the search results. And when I found out it worked was when someone called me. This is kind of neat. Someone called me and said, Ronnie, what are you doing? You're taking over all of my search phrases online. And I said, oh, then I guess it's working. And so this is the kind of confirmation I needed rather than just me looking myself, because it influences what you see based on when you're logged in. So someone else that didn't know necessarily I was doing something, calling me and telling me, stop it, because I was taking over what he wanted to do, was very beneficial. So with that said, it helped me solidify my love, in essence, of Google Plus as a platform. And then this Google Plus Place came out not only with the Hangout tool, which involves video, but this Hangout on Air tool, which is the broadcast ability to turn your visuals into a show, which is a video eventually, and then that video can be optimized. So you bring in training, because this is a new tool, everybody needs to know about it, so I thought I can do that. And then you bring in video SEO, and the fact that I got experience being a trainer and being a public speaker, and you tie that all together and you sit me down in front of a computer and I can do all this stuff. So here we are.
That's one of the better, more interesting histories that I've heard, Ronnie. That's
Well,
really that's really fascinating. It's interesting though. I mean, for the most part, training and teaching tend to be similar things. It sounds like you've been a teacher for a long time.
yeah, I actually put myself through part of college by teaching people how to play trumpet. Because
Ah,
I'm a trumpet player, and that's how you do some of that stuff.
right. Right. So, as a teacher, as someone that did public speaking for a long time, how important do you see nonverbals being both in the public speaking realm and just in regular communication?
What does regular communication mean?
You know, between two individuals in a dialogue or in a conversation, in developing relationships, period.
And you're talking potentially in real life, meaning people face to face rather than say in a hangout necessarily environment, right?
For now, we'll
For
talk
now,
about
okay.
nonverbals in general.
Okay, nonverbals in general. I find it very, very important because first off, I think we make more of our judgments as to whether we're going to believe this person, we're going to trust them, or whether we're cautious based on how they look and how they act when they're communicating with us. If every time I say something, the person I'm speaking with starts to look away and I'm still talking and they're just sort of looking up there, I probably don't think they're very engaged. And so as a result, I don't feel like my communication is working with them. And as a result, it may be working just fine, but that's just sort of a interesting or weird, quirky thing they've got. And that's going to be harder for them to connect with people because when people look you in the eye and they are paying attention or appear to be paying attention, that gives you a different signal and you feel different about the way you're communicating with them.
It does make a difference, and you're right. A lot of communication research does say, especially uh, in America and Western civilizations in general, we tend to rely on nonverbals more than verbals because we think that nonverbals lie less than any sort of verbal communication. So thinking about that aspect of lying and telling the truth,
Mhm.
how do you see nonverbals playing into online communication? Before Hangouts, before video conferencing became a public all access type thing, how do you think that played into this whole trust factor that we talk about a lot in online communication?
Well, before we do what we're doing now, this live interactive thing that's in a video space, we primarily relied on text. And secondarily, we relied on video. And that's the video part's important to me because that's how I got involved with the SEO stuff. But the text in and of itself, it's really hard to tell whether somebody's just telling you a story or they're telling the truth. You just have to either take clues from part of the communication that they've done before and maybe how you know them to have acted in the past to try to judge whether this is the truth or not. I think there was very little that we could find in the text communication to determine the veracity or whether we wanted to believe them or to what degree we believe them. And so as a result, I think many people became more and more skeptical because they say, well, it's on the internet, it must be true, right? So that right there is an expression of doubt, if you get right down to it. And because of the fact that so many people could just stick something on there, it was harder and harder to get to the point where we believed them. So then comes the advent of video. Video adds another layer of truthfulness, in essence, because you do have these nonverbals that you can look at to see whether this person seems to be telling the truth or not. But we've got a dilemma there. And the dilemma comes in, well, maybe they're not that comfortable in front of a camera. And that comfort level, if they're doing their best, for example, to make sure they talk about 3 things in this 3-minute video, they might not be very comfortable. As a result, it looks like maybe they're not really telling the truth, but they might be. And so we've got this little dilemma when you have a very structured communication environment where sometimes there's false positives, meaning something that's going to be there to guide you away from what's really going on. Then comes, I don't know if it's okay to keep going, Alex.
Yeah, no, keep going.
Then comes the advent of what we're doing here with this video conversation thing. And this is something that's been actually very top of mind for me lately, where we've talked about, we meaning me and some other people like David Amerland, which I think was have been part of your series before. We recently talked about the idea that when a brand or people are using this Hangout on Air tool, and they are sticking to the script and they are not allowing anybody to interact with any questions, that we feel less trusting of them because we don't know whether this is a canned presentation and they are going outside of what they are supposed to say, or it's just what they're supposed to say and they can't say anything else. So the trust level, I am thinking, is becoming more and more important, not only with whether we're able to respond to questions off the cuff, but also what we look like when we're responding. So this nonverbal communication part is really, really key when it comes to this Hangout type technology because you can tell from somebody's expressions and their countenance whether this is sort of clicking with them, whether they're excited about it, or this is just something that they have to say because they're supposed to. And so you can really get a sense of whether you want to believe them and trust them and whether you're going to follow that or you decide, yeah, that was good, but I'm moving on.
So you brought in brands, and part of the reason that I like to do this series is because, again, my students are going to go out and they're going to find jobs eventually.
We sure hope
Hopefully.
so, right?
I know, right? I'm sure they're hoping so. And when they go out into the working world, it's going to look different than it does today. So you're in the Hangout business. Obviously, you think that video is becoming more and more important in online communication. What do you think that they should expect when they're going into the working world? Do you think that a lot of brands in, say, a year or 2 years are going to be doing this kind of communication as a brand? Or do you think that they're going to be the ones that have to introduce it to them?
That's a great question. I would strongly encourage them, especially because if they're focusing on the idea of communication, to get used to these tools because I believe these tools are going to be part of the future, whether the company they go to already are embracing it or they want to embrace it. If you can come to that company saying, I know how to do the Skype thing, I know how to do Hangouts, in fact, I've run many shows myself, that right there is going to push you above or beyond others that won't have that experience And as a result, they, when they do determine that they need to use this thing, are going to call upon you, or you'll have a better chance of getting the gig or job. Sorry, I started using the musician terminology. So the idea here is it's not that hard for you guys sitting out there. I promise you. You know, you get to the point where you know which buttons to push, and I train people how to do that, and I can tell you it's not that hard, especially for the younger minds. The older they get, the harder it is for them to figure out all the stuff, because honestly, there's a lot that goes on all at once. But probably you guys in the classroom, and many of you watching this, have probably played a lot of video games. And if that's part of your life, you've already been in an environment where you've got so much input coming at you all the time, and you verbally are visually paying attention to lots of things all at once. This is not going to be a hard thing for you. Just think of it as a nice game. In fact, it could get a little slow because you're just sitting here talking sometimes. So the idea that you could embrace this technology and master it so that you can move it along, and not only do it for your career, do it for your own personal life. You can find people and meet people literally from all over the world and start building relationships with people that you would never, ever have an opportunity to do physically because of the magic of this tool. So if you get to the point where you embrace the tool and you like it, then it's going to come across when you're in that environment where you're getting a job interview or something like that, and you can say, yeah, I use it all the time because of ABC. So I would do it.
All right, I always have questions. I'm curious like that. But does anybody have any questions for Ronnie? No? You guys are going to stay quiet? Quiet bunch.
All right, let me ask them a question.
Oh, please do.
What out of the video tools like Hangouts versus Skype versus maybe some other tools that you FaceTime or something like that, any of those, have any of you used any of those at all?
Skype, yeah.
Skype and FaceTime? What do you use? Skype?
Yeah. FaceTime occasionally. I used to use Skype, but it's kind of on the wayside now. And Snapchat. I guess that's not instant, really.
Okay, so Skype they're familiar with, FaceTime, and I hear it over and over again. Snapchat is the chosen mode of communication with a lot of students these days. Like they'll Snapchat sometimes without texting, right? You guys will like Snapchat instead of
just pictures.
Text, just pictures. They communicate with just pictures.
Right, right. So because of the similarity between Skype and Hangouts, let's talk about that for a moment. The idea of one of the differences, just so you have an idea of how these relate. The Skype world is primarily the tool where you can visually communicate in a how do I say it? In a Skype session. So what we've got here that's slightly different is the Hangouts on-air tool allows you to have interaction not only with the people you're speaking with directly, but potentially a whole group of other people that are watching the conversation. And that may not make sense for you right now, but that's what a business is going to need to do. They're going to need to be more in the realm of communication in a larger setting, where it's not just you talking to a couple other people, but it's almost more like a TV show. But that's different here is, and I like to quote one of my Hangout heroes, Sarah Hill. She coined the phrase, yelling at the TV. So people can yell at the TV, but this time the TV can yell back. So we can get communication two ways, and this is something with a larger viewing audience that is not available in other environments. So this, to me, is one of the delineations between the different types of platforms where the Hangouts really come to shine, is this ability to do interactive communication. And that,
why is that so important for brands? I think a lot of times that's lost on a
well,
lot.
it's definitely lost. In fact, I'm on a what would you call it? I've decided I'm going to embrace this goal and try to get brands to see the value of that. What's important, because brands, in fact, I've got an article. It's just not published yet. I've got it all, I'm working on it still. The idea that many brands is they'll come out and I will help them or others will help them and say, look, when you have a Hangout on air, it's like you've got your own TV network. And they get it. And they say, okay, I understand. I'm going to broadcast my message. and I won't need to pay for the time on the network. I can do it for free inside Google+. I just need to learn how to use it, and then we're off and running, and I now have another place to broadcast. And that is just as bad. Well, let me rephrase that. That's a great place to start. Please start, okay? But when you end there, you just only use maybe 20 to 30% of the capability of this tool. Because it's just like taking a social media environment and broadcasting your link and saying, check out my blog, and then you're done and you move on. Most of us, or many people, are learning that that doesn't, at least in Google+, it does not fly. It does not work very well. People want to know more about you. They want to eventually engage with you to then come to the point where they trust you and they want to believe what you're saying and follow along with what you're asking them to do. So the same thing with this Hangout thing. If we just do a broadcast and we don't allow the viewers to interact with us, it's just, in my mind, almost the same as if you've recorded a video and you stuck it out there on the internet. Why do a live show? What's the advantage of having a live show if there's no way to interact? This tool gives us the options to interact. And so that, to me, I think is one of the differences. Now, you might be wondering, what's the big deal about interaction? Or you should be wondering that. And the answer, if that question was in your head, is let's say Ronnie trains people how to use Hangouts, which is what I do. And I just tell you the 7 things that you need to know in order to make Hangouts work well for you, and you're off and running and you're fine and you're happy. I can do that in a video. What's the point of doing it in a Hangout? The point of the Hangout is I can let other people in the Hangout film strip or other people potentially on the outside ask me a question, and then I can answer it. What happens when they ask me a random question that's related to Hangouts and I give a good answer? That's a real question. What do you think that happens out there to the person that asked the question? What just happened to them?
Any thoughts? If someone asks, so if you were on a social network and you happen to run across Ronnie doing a presentation, and you're like, oh man, this guy knows what he's talking about, and you throw out a question and he actually picks it up and answers it, how does that make you feel as a viewer?
I mean, helped.
You feel helped?
I can't think of the word.
Like, thank you, a little grateful, like, thank you, you helped me.
Okay.
Appreciated. You feel appreciated.
All right, so you're appreciated, you're grateful, you are validated, and all of a sudden you were part of the show, and then what do you maybe do with your friends? You say, hey, I was part of the show, check it out. That's one thing you might do. And so therefore you just help spread the reach of that show. But you also, here's the key, you also, in my mind, increased your level of trust of the guy who answered the question or the person that answered the question back to you. They just went up a notch in their ability to be trustworthy to you. Because not only did they have 7 good things to talk about, but when you asked them something that was outside of that 7 and they could answer the question, bam, right there, the level of trust went up. That, to me, is what's missing with the brands. When the brands do not allow themselves this option to be asked questions and then give the ability to show that they know what they're doing, it does not allow their trust level to grow. And to me, that's what's missing a lot of times when people just do a presentation.
What would be the difference then? What if they just responded to a comment on a post rather than responding in a live video? What's the difference between those 2 responses in as far as trust goes?
Yeah, good question. I would say the trust is higher when they respond off the cuff because now you know they can answer that question right away. Whereas if they did it by typing, it could have been something that they have on their little cheat sheet with all the answers, and then they look it up and they say, okay, here's the text I need to copy and paste. So your ability to sense whether they know their stuff or not is enhanced with live interaction versus maybe this text that comes in on later on.
I would have to agree. It's a lot easier, and it's a lot easier to come up with a lie when you have time to think about it, right?
Yeah, yeah. So I think
from experience or anything, but
no. So the point is trust, and a lot of this comes down to trust. Who you're going to trust, because there's so much out there. There's so many people yelling the answers or yelling the questions when you get to the point where you can say, you know what, I like the way this guy responds, I like the way this lady is really on top of these things, I'm going to start to follow them, and then that grows that level of interaction, that relationship. And so as a result, I believe if that option is there for this live interaction, it not only will help, but it'll also solidify that relationship. But here's the big caveat. Most businesses or brands don't trust their team to do it. And when I say most, let's put it this way, most traditional ones. The newer ones that are smaller, especially the smaller ones, have less barriers. It's the larger ones, the larger companies that say, you know what, in order for you to be able to respond like that, we're going to need you to go through a training session that's going to take you 2 years so that we know that you have the same values as the company, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And as a result, they're going to have a harder time, I believe, building trust in the near future than the little guys are, because the little guys are just them, or it's a small team and they all have the same core beliefs. So go for it. Just go ahead and answer. And so I think the littler guys are going to have an easier job maintaining and building trust in this new age that we're coming to than the big guys, which is interesting, I think.
And exciting for us little guys.
Yeah, because what's happened here is all this technology that we get for free, that used to have to be used and owned by the big guys because no one else could afford it. Now it's free. And so as a result, the little guys have this broadcasting platform that we can utilize to our best advantage for free. And so the playing field, as many would say, has been leveled drastically.
So our time is almost up, but before I let you go, I want to go back to, you mentioned that sometimes we get mixed signals because some people aren't comfortable being on camera. That's one of the biggest issues. So if I'm new to this, if I'm new to being on camera, if I'm new to being on video, and God forbid on a live event, and I have to host it, what would you recommend? How do you get comfortable? How do you get used to interacting with a camera rather than an actual person?
Sure. I got a multi-step process. First thing is, and I'm going to focus on using the Hangout tool because that's what I know inside and out, and encourage people to play with because, again, it's free. I would start a Hangout that's just me alone and get inside the space and just poke at the buttons. And so I get to the point where I feel comfortable. If I click on this, it won't blow up. Okay? Second thing is I would get my friend or friends to come in and let's just have a chat, a conversation. Get to the point where I feel comfortable knowing what they look like, and then I get a visual picture in my own head. What do I look like based on what they're looking like, and that kind of thing. And then third, I would start what I call unlisted Hangouts on air. And what an unlisted Hangout on air means is you're going to be broadcasting, but nobody's going to be watching it. So that then creates a video. Then you can go back and watch your video. In fact, I'd camp out on that a long time. I would do a bunch of those videos and see, you know what, when I'm looking at this place, it looks like I'm looking at the camera. But when I'm looking down there at all the people, it looks like I'm not looking at the camera. And I never would have noticed that except for looking at my own video later on. So making recordings, in essence, to see what you look like with your friends, just come in and hang out. That's part of the name of the tool, hang out. Then I would try to get myself invited into other people's shows so that I can be part of it. I might not need to be an active part of it, but at least I'm in the film strip getting a feel for what it's like in a real live broadcast. And then, and only then, do I bring in the level of actually starting to run my own show. Where people go wrong is they bypass all of those steps I mentioned, and they start by saying, I can do my own show, I'm going to start today. And then all of a sudden, they have this broadcast that maybe doesn't look so good, and then they either get discouraged or they continue and nobody really wants to trust them because that nonverbal communication is a problem, because they're like, I wonder what I need to do. And they're so focused on the technology that the message they're trying to get across just doesn't make it because they're focused in the wrong place.
And of course, those hosting qualities are what are going to be extremely valuable to brands in the near future.
Yeah. So if you guys, and I say guys in a generic sense, all of you watching out there, if you get to the point where you can be comfortable in this visible environment of the Hangouts and you feel pretty comfortable with the tools so the technology can disappear, That, to me, will be an asset for you when it comes time for looking for a job in a realm where they are willing and able to embrace this live visual communication medium, which is, I think, going to become more and more popular.
I think so too, which is why nonverbals are so important and why it's so important to know what they are. Right, guys? Right. Because that's what the book said, right? Kyle?
We all read the book.
You all read the book. All right, Ronnie. Well, our time is up, but thank you so much for coming into my classroom when you have such a busy day. You have 5 of these today? Was it
I
5?
had, yeah, I think it's 5 that are recorded. There's a few more that aren't.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's insane. I don't know how you do that. But again, thank you so much for your time and helping me try to get through to these kids how important nonverbal communication is and communication in general. All right, John. Until next
I'll
time.
take us out. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today for another episode of Glass in the Class. Our special guest was Ronnie Bincer, the Hangout Helper. Find him on Google Plus, along with, well, all the rest of us. We'll see you again next time. Thank you so much. Remember, Alex is at Kent State. Check that place out. They're actually doing some interesting things with technology. We'll see you again. Bye now.